Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Break the Rules. I'm Lev Polyakov, and today we are here with Disco Orpheus. It's been a while since we've spoken, back from the old Cali accelerationist days when you were more anonymous. And for the first time, Stelios Panagiotou. I hope that I did justice to that surname, but you are originally from Greece, and you are a PhD in philosophy.
Yes.
And I am very happy to have both of you in here today because right now, what we're going to be talking about is in relation to both a lot of the struggles that have been going on in the West when it comes to migration, as well as a philosophical question, too. What exactly are we building up towards? What does it mean to live in a pluralistic liberal society? Do we necessarily have to go all the way back into trad mode? But today, it is very unfortunate that what we start talking about here is the death of Henry Nowak, the murder, and what exactly is going to happen from here on in, whether there is just one more horrible occurrence of many to come that the British people and the people in the West will, make a big deal about for a couple of days or weeks, and then it'll be business as usual, or whether what we're seeing right now with his murder by the Sikh guy who is arrested right now, whether this is something that is going to create some kind of a change when it comes to the social contract of the West. Because the impression that at least people online have gotten, and I have also gotten pushback from people on Discord saying like, no, Lev, this isn't exactly the case in Britain. So I want to talk about that aspect of it as well. But the idea being that there is a two-tier justice system that discriminates against the native white Britons in favor of people who are quote unquote the protected class, where it wouldn't really make a difference. For those who don't know what happened here, the Sikh guy, he stabbed Henry and then accused him of racism, and the police ended up handcuffing Henry while he was bleeding out, saying that he couldn't breathe, and he ended up dying afterwards. So the idea here is that, well, this is a two-tier justice system that would assume guilt on the part of the white man before assuming any malfeasance on the part of the migrant, who, I don't even think it would have made a difference to the police whether or not he was Sikh or Muslim or, anything like that. I think that they would just see, brown person, thus I'm going to react in this particular way to him versus to the white guy. At least that's the impression that I got online. Again, I could be wrong. I want to hear from the audience, and I want to hear from you guys what exactly you see is going on here. And let us start with Stelios, first time here, and also of the Lotus Eaters as well. So Stelios, you have the floor. And once again, everybody who's watching, make sure to like, subscribe, click the bell. It really helps grow this channel. So Stelios, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lev. I'm really looking forward to a discussion and also very happy to be here also with Orpheus. I think what happened in discourse in November 2024 was that people forgot that wokeness is still among us. Ever since Trump won, he took some steps against wokeness, and wokeness stopped being the hot topic in online discourse. That doesn't mean, though, that it has gone away. And there have been people who thought that wokeness has gone away. They just don't know what they're talking about, and they didn't know back then. Why? Because if we look at what wokeness is, you will see that I think nothing changes, and all this is according to plan. Wokeness involves separating the population into hierarchies of oppressed and non-oppressed, and within the non-oppressed, there are gradations of within the oppressed, there are gradations of who is more oppressed and who is less. So that's the oppression calculus. I think the term the left is using is the intersectional calculus. It essentially says that if you're a black trans woman, you're the most entitled being in the universe. So what happens in wokeness is that it says that equality is before the law isn't enough. And there have been past historical injustices unique to the Western world. You don't listen to leftists talking about the Arab slave trade, for instance, just close parenthesis. And they think that there is a unique civilizational guilt that can only be atoned for if there is a sort of address of past historical injustices. And they say that the only way to do this is essentially by treating the more oppressed preferentially. And preferentially means that in some respects they get away with it, in some respects they're massaged, in several respects. And they are above criticism. If you criticize, for instance, the Sikh right now and the community how reacted, which I think is less bad than how, for instance, radical Muslims react when crimes are committed by Islamists. What they're saying there is that criticism of communities that are foreign communities is bad tribal politics, and there is complete gaslighting about far right and right wing extremism, and they constantly try to bring the discussion to the late 30s and 40s in Europe. So essentially, the system is designed, and it explicitly says that in order for past historical injustices to be addressed, the more oppressed one is, the better one must be treated. And if you are in the oppressor category, you are treated as a second-class citizen. Why? Because, as they say, equality before the law is not enough. If equality before the law is not enough, then you have a two-tier system. You have first-class and second-class citizens. And by implication, those who are treated as the oppressed are treated as first-class citizens, and it is being portrayed as a matter of equity and addressing historical injustice to treat whoever is a native Westerner. It's not just Brits; it's also French in France. It's the Germans in Germany. It's wider than that. To treat them as second-class citizens. So essentially, the system, the philosophy of the system, is designed to be a two-tier system. It's implied.
Orpheus, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure, yeah. It is ultimately about power. So this oppressor framework that Stelios described, what a lot of people, now I think most people are aware, but Stelios makes a good point where what it looks like online, we think the world has changed and become aware of this system, but in real life it still exists, especially institutionally. Philosophically and emotionally, it's fundamentally about power. It's not about creating equity or creating equality. Those lower down on this, oppressed or oppressor scale, they don't want fairness, or it's not built to create fairness. It's just built to invert the power structure.
Do you see it as inverting the power structure purely from this naive idea of, wanting to heal these inequalities and create a better world? Or do you guys see it as being more of a malevolent, almost for some people, an understanding that this is all fake and unreal, and this is just something that's being done for some greater purpose, whether it's to have cheaper labor pools or whether it's to have more control over the civilians? Because one of the things that comes to mind with this current situation in Britain especially is this idea of a anarcho tyranny, if you're familiar with that term, where law-abiding citizens are the ones that end up getting exploited and punished for minor infractions. Meanwhile, criminals are allowed to criminalize. Whoever wants to go for that.
I'll jump in quickly. I think it's different at different levels. So you have there's different archetypal characteristics that are on play, like depending on where you are in society. So you have the school mom female archetype who is relatively dim-witted, and ostensibly just want like equality because they see themselves as like school teachers for kindergarten kids. Essentially, it's that same mentality. So they've got their little kids in their playpen and they want to make sure that everyone is having a good time. A good example of this is the woman on Question Time, which did the rounds on Twitter this evening and yesterday evening, who was part. I think she was a member of the Green Party, and there's this clip where she's talking about immigration increasing the need for housing in England, and she sort of looked astounded and aghast that I guess he was a Reform member, would suggest that yes, more immigration means equates to a housing crisis. And it was like in her assumption,
that's the lady right there in the thumbnail with the goofy looking face.
Yeah. So this is an archetype as much as this is like an actual human being. Like she's embodying like a political and societal archetype of a woman who is this school mom who has this assumption that she is correct about the redistribution of equality. Whether she's a cynic, like whether she's cynical or not, I probably don't think so. I think she's just like dim-witted. But further up the political hierarchy, there are definitely people who are purely cynical.
So take Tony Blair, for instance. Would that be an example of somebody who is cynical?
Yes, yeah, like because they've been a good way to understand it, at least, is and Keir Starmer as well. So the Blairite and Starmer faction, when they were my age, they were Trotskyites. So they had been inculcated into Soviet Trotskyist ideology, and they were like little bacteria kind of growing under the heat lamp of this ideology. And there's the way I see it is that they are like ideologically brainwashed, and they've lived 40 years of this ideology, and because it was happened through a cultural revolution rather than a political revolution. So it's like they have no other choice really. Like, it's like as you get older as well, your mentality ossifies. You're not able to change your mind easily, especially if you're an ideologue like these guys. So I would say that they are. It's not necessarily that they're looking for equality, but they've been entrenched into this kind of mindset. And then the final point I would make just about the English sensibility that we have, which allows this mentality to have been bred so effectively, is we have this quite oppressive mentality, which you don't have in the USA so much. You didn't, at least, but it's bled over into there, where in the USA people are willing to celebrate success and winning, whereas in England and other parts in Europe, Sweden is the same. There, like, you have to be understated, and the underdog is glorified. And in a world that is based on race, which is natural, because it is, but in a world where you're implying the underdog needs to be given like all amount of assistance, then the underdog is perpetually the immigrant or the minority. So it's this like general milieu, like this attitude that we have in Western Europe, which allows this to proliferate. And so we end up it's almost like a psychic behavioral phenomenon where we downplay any of our own successes, and the natural character that gets glorified becomes the minority, because they, as Stelios say, they fit into this oppressed category.
I really like what you said, and I want to add several things. I think that it's definitely a question of numbers. Some people are true believers, others are cynical. I do think that the proportion of the cynical rises when you reach the top echelons of power, definitely. I'll go back from Trotsky to Lenin. Lenin said at some point that if workers are left by themselves, they will choose a form of syndicalism. They won't choose communism. Hence why you need a vanguard party to tell workers what their true interests are. The left has changed since then. They don't care about the worker or the industrial worker like the proletarian. And I think that definitely since the 60s, they have definitely moved into the universities. They have stopped focusing on the workers. And now, with the fall of the USSR and the advance of globalization, they have gone completely global. And what does this imply? It implies that the very simplistic, but also informative discrepancy between the rich and the poor for the left isn't understood domestically anymore. It's understood globally. So the question becomes, who are the globally rich and who are the globally poor? The way that they are formulating this, and I think it definitely happened under the cabinet of Tony Blair, this push towards global thinking in terms of the left, arguably before, but definitely with Tony Blair. Almost everyone who is a member of a working class in a Western country counts as globally rich, according to the new perspective. Therefore, according to the left, they have to be treated as the rich, the people who are constantly going to be taxed in order to raise the standards of living of the oppressed. And they always go for what they consider to be revolutionary dynamic, and they consider this to be present in the so-called third world to a very large extent. Now, let me add some of the archetypes, and I hope I'm not I'm not going to be accused of stereotypical thinking, but I'd say that there's also the archetype of the boomer, who is like there is a comedy. In fact, there is also a sequel about six boomers going to India, to the best Marigold Hotel. That's also another stereotype. The old boomer who is stuck into that paradigm and constantly thinks that the natives within the Western country are bad because they're not going to take care of them. They're not going to look after them. They're going to send them to care home. And they are stuck into this idea that no one from the Western world is going to become a care worker.
By the way, it's almost kind of like an imperialistic vision in a way, where they're this British officer of the East India Company, and they've landed in Britain, and now they're being taken care of by these foreign servants, if you will. I don't know how much that factors into that vision the boomers have.
I think this is definitely something that Orepheus is more qualified to talk about. But one thing I will say, in order to give you the pass, is that I do think that there is such a thing, and we see it a lot in the propensity of the system and of the culture towards being multicultural. And there are various contradictions there, but let me say what I mean. When you administrate an empire, and the British Empire was the biggest empire in human history, there is a need for multiculturalism, because you need allies. You always need allies. Whoever tells you don't need allies is basically trying to divide you and conquer you. You always need allies. And the best way to form alliances with countries under your sphere of influence is if you allow them to a large degree to practice their own culture, if you're the biggest power. So empires and multiculturalism frequently go together. That doesn't mean multiculturalism in the metropolis. But after the dismantlement, after the British Empire was dismantled, there does seem to be a form of, let's remember it. Let's say treat the previous queen as sacred because she reminds us she is a pillar of stability during the times of the dissolution of the empire. And there are, in times of rapid social change, it's human. I'm not criticizing it. People do want to stand from something and treat it as stable. And this culture can be seen also as something stable. So you could say that trying to recreate in the domestic level, on the domestic level, the conditions of a global empire will imply multicultural practices, or at least it has. So I think Orepheus.
Absolutely. I think Frank Wright, who recently became extremely famous overnight, he was the guy in God, where was it? But who got interviewed on the street by Vox Populi, who let out this incredible soliloquy. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about here. And he's on the Lotus Eaters now as well, which is cool. It's great to see. He talked about it quite interestingly, where colonialism obviously wound down after the war. Big question to ask, like, why, if you've just won a war, would you then get rid of all your assets? I mean, obviously there's a logistical reason. They owed America and the international financiers their assets in return for America's participation in World War II. But the mentality of colonialism didn't end. It then just reversed and became inward colonialism. So we reverse colonized Britain, and the native population of Britain became like the native population of Guinea-Bissau, or whatever country that was colonized in the 1800s, where they then become like subject to a foreign installation. That's like, in essence, the way it's kind of undergone.
I do have a quick question regarding that, though. So in New York City, for instance, we have the various Uber Eats, other delivery services that are mainly operated, by the African guys on the bicycles. In Britain, from what I understand, it's pretty similar. You have Deliveroo, I believe that's what it's called, that delivers food to people through their phone. And in that sense, there does seem to be a lot of this cheap labor that is taken up by the migrants. But what you're saying is that if there is any kind of tiered system, then those migrants, even though they're on the bottom of the totem pole in a certain way, in another sense, they're not. So I'm kind of curious about what you see that relationship being, specifically within this new service economy.
Yeah, I guess it's less financial. It's more community-based is a big one. So although the delivery jeets, although that you have these delivery guys, yes, it's mainly migrant labor in London and in other big cities, it's ghettoized. So they have their communities, and the illegal immigration numbers, I'm fairly certain, are probably analyzed, underreported, because while you have the guy one member of the family who does do Deliveroo, there's also 6 other members of his family who are here, who came here on a visa, and then the visa's expired and they've just never left, and they've just folded themselves into the ghetto in which they live, and nobody knows that they exist. And then, of course, you have the barber shops. So in England, one of the biggest mechanisms with which criminal immigrant syndicates can exist is by having one front-facing business, like a Turkish barbershop, and then from that barbershop, it's also it's drug running front, essentially, and so while they still are at the bottom of the totem pole, like you were saying, in terms of a member of the family doing one of these low-level delivery jobs, they have a community that exists off the books, outside of the identification realm of the British government. And British communities, in complete contrast, have basically deteriorated into nothingness. So an easy like benchmark example is the amount of pubs that have gone under in the last 10 years. I mean, it's extraordinary. Like the pub is the backbone of British communities. And yeah, there's, I don't know what the exact actual statistics would be, but let's say it's like 2/3 of them or half of them have ceased to exist compared to 20 years ago. And so it's like the fabric of community living in England for the native population has disappeared. And so it's these more intangible things that are actually more important.
Stelios.
One thing I want to add is, I don't know, I may have misheard, but when you spoke about the barbershops and all these businesses, I don't think they're under the radar of the government. I may have misheard, but for instance, you can go walk in and when they tell you, sorry, mate, I only accept cash. Well, when the entire 99.9% of the country also has POS.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of get an idea.
What is POS for those who don't know?
When you pay, you pay by card.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the transaction is immediately visible to the authorities. Now, I understand some libertarians may hate this, but we're talking about, how mafias are essentially demoralizing the country. And they are also, by implication, ridiculing the government because they know who these people are, and they choose to do nothing.
There is an example also in the United States. If you recall, there was that anti-Islam protest in front of Gracie Mansion in New York City, where there were these two Muslim terrorist guys that almost set off an IED. And the father of one of them, his name is Khair Kayumi. He's from Afghanistan, and he runs a Popeyes franchise. So do his cousins. And I'm just trying to figure out, like in the United States, I think it's less so than it is in Britain, but how exactly this whole process of migration works, as well as which particular industries they want to take over, as well as how, let's say, something like fiqh, as they call it in Islamic Sharia law, how that functions in terms of extrajudicial Islamic court systems that we are not aware of. So I don't know.
Right. So this is a very complex matter. I don't have an authoritative answer, but I think that to some extent, the government of the UK has allowed several Muslim communities to operate their Sharia courts. But that said, I don't think that this is something that tramples or it overrides British law. I think that they are just using this in order to diffuse tension. That doesn't mean, I don't want to BS you. I don't want to constantly say, inaccurate things just to trash the government. I don't think that necessarily this means that a court ruling that would contradict a court ruling of the British legal system would be allowed. I don't think that this is the case. But there are several other ways in which the legal system is being manipulated and is being reformed and has changed. And you can think of, for instance, of trial by jury. And I'll give you the example of Ricky Jones, the Labour councillor who, during the Southport riots, I don't know if I can do this for YouTube. I don't want you to get...
you can use code words in a way. We'll be able to read between the lines.
He basically incited to violence in a very explicit manner. He even did the mannerism of a throat being slit.
Oh. Yeah.
And you had people clapping nearby, and he just said it's the far right, and all these bullshit, and he got away with it. He got away with it because
the
jury body, the body of juries, the people who comprise the jury there, they just thought that he deserved another chance. You can say that this is a case where everyone says, like, right, let's abolish trial by jury. But you may not even have jury. You may have a single judge without a jury, like the judge in the case of Epping, who overrode the initial court ruling that says, well, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have these asylum seekers here who have engaged in sexual assault and abuse. Maybe we should listen to the community. And then there was a judge, I think a member of the Fabian Society or in some way associated with the Fabian Society, who said, well, I respect the concerns of the citizens of Epping and the residents of Epping, but it doesn't override their human rights. And obviously, when we mean about human rights, we're not talking about the right to breathe or to, engage in economic transactions. We're talking about a very specific understanding of what human rights entails, which is a complete nonsensical and unrestricted free movement has never been a thing ever in the history of mankind. And I constantly hear libertarians talking about unrestricted freedom of movement. No, mate. When you have your property and you lock it, you are essentially raising barriers to the freedom of movement of other people. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but let's be real and be honest about what's happening.
There is also this, I don't want to go too off topic here, but there is also this tendency within libertarian circles to assume that all of the problems of the world are from the United States military-industrial complex, and if only America were to leave all these poor people alone, then everybody would be able to live in peace. And that seems to be the other front of this battle that we're in. When it comes to, on one hand, we have people who talk about, being trad and base and all that. And on the other hand, not that they're going full leftist mode when it comes to accepting the migrants, but they're looking towards people like Alexander Dugin, for instance, people who talk about this Eurasian nonsense about how, white people are horrible and they don't really exist, yada, yada, yada. And there is this interesting, there's this interesting split that I've been seeing right now among people who are on the right, where we have certain people from the reactionary end that, on one hand, we have like the Candace Owenses who are going to Russia and hanging out, with all these oligarchs and trad leaders with, $1,000 watches or, tens of thousands of dollars. And on the other hand, we have people who, even though they came from more of a reactionary end, they are now taking another look at what exactly is going on here. And they are sort of rebelling against this very top-down, almost like slave mentality type of traditionalism. And since both of you studied Greek culture, philosophy, Orpheus, your name is Orpheus, as we talked about before, even though you have been, more reactionary towards a lot of things in the modern condition, while Stelios, you are more of a classic liberal, would you say that there is some room for you to agree on there being a need to have this kind of good sort of progress, as opposed to trying to copy whatever it is that we're seeing from the third world, even though, yes, maybe they have stable families and all of that, there is still something that's like this Asiatic hive mind that in a way I think the West has outgrown. I don't know.
Different. I'm going to make a quick point. Just based on the last thing you said about like the family structure. Third world countries, you could say they have stable family structures, but it's not in a way that can be expressed in the European world. Like a sort of good example for this is in Africa, for example, take Senegal, right? You might have a strong family cohesion, but at the same time, it doesn't work. So I read this very interesting story written by a Senegalese man who owned a petrol station, and his business went under within like a year because the extended family, who weren't family members at all, the assumption was that they would get everything, like their petrol, for free, because they knew him. And so like his business was it couldn't exist for a very long time because their structures, while being sort of pluralistic, are also like not, it doesn't work in a first world country like in Europe. So you can't make maybe that's a kind of a weird point to make, but you can't compare the way things are done in the third world to the way things are done in Europe, because we have just completely different sensibilities. But just quickly, again, I don't want to take it too off topic, but I do want to go back to one thing that Stelios said about how we've gone global. And so this comparison of oppressed, oppressor, or who's rich and who's poor can't be a national issue anymore. It has to be a global issue. And I think one of the biggest examples of this is George Floyd. So George Floyd in Minneapolis was killed, or actually died of a fentanyl overdose. And immediately you had riots in London, and you had football players in London, and Keir Starmer himself taking a knee in London for something that happened in the USA in Minneapolis. So we're already global. Like the Western culture, Anglo-American culture, yeah, exactly. Like making a publicized, farce out of it immediately. So we already live in this like global mental cultural environment where something that happens literally 6,000 miles away is immediately the biggest news where you live. And that is a bizarre world to live in. Realistically, there shouldn't be riots in Peckham because of something that happened in Minneapolis.
Now, what do you think of the same taking a knee being done right now when it comes to the murder of Henry Nowak? So, for example, Curtis Yarvin, who I'm probably going to be, definitely going to be seeing him in a week. I'm going to this conference about supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion. And Curtis is going to be there. And I'm going to have a panel discussion with him. We're right now figuring out when to do that and all that. And Curtis recently wrote that what's going on right now with the British people taking the knee for Henry, that's a literal cargo cult George Floyd. They think gay race communism, except in reverse, can actually work, only shows how cooked the poor Brits are. It's like you get conquered by cruel Arab overlords, and 100 years later, you're praying to Allah to make them go away. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I have to add several things here, especially to what you said before. There is definitely lots of room for discussion between myself and Orepheus. We shouldn't hide behind labels and behind isms. I'm not an ideologue. I think after a while, ideology is getting a bit boring. We have to focus on a case-by-case scenario. So, the proof is in the pudding. Now, when it comes to the bending the knee, well, let me just say, first of all, the establishmentarians who took the knee, who bended the knee for George Floyd, did no such thing right now. Right now, they're constantly trying to do the exact opposite. They accelerated when it came to Minneapolis and the BLM riots. And I would add, not even Minneapolis should burn. Not even Minneapolis should burn. Nothing of this should have been ever tolerated. And at that point, I think the governor of Minneapolis was who was it? The one Kamala Harris's pick for VP, a potential VP.
Oh yeah, what's wrong with me? I'm the American here. Tim Walz.
Tim Walz. His wife said she opened her windows and she could breathe the smoke from the fires of the riots, and she felt elated. Right. So we are talking about someone who is brainwashed by ideology there. Right. The CNN described the riots, the BLM riots, as fiery but mostly peaceful.
Meanwhile, in the background,
Yes.
7-Eleven was like about to explode.
Yes. When Irina Zarutska was murdered, was it last August? And then we found out, I think.
Yeah.
The mainstream media tried to completely memory hole it. And even now, any mural that is being created for her, they're trying to say this is a symbol of hate and division, but it's okay when we do it. That's essentially what they're doing. These are all the implications of the two-tier system we mentioned before. And it also shows how they are completely cynical in that, because, for instance, Irina Zarutska was not you'd say, a right-wing shield maiden of the far right, as I think Eva Vlaardingerbroek describes herself. She wasn't that. I think, in fact, she was very, on the so-called progressive side.
Yeah. Neither was Henry Nowak, from what I understand.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure he was just like an average 18-year-old.
Yeah. And you see the way, what is incredibly disgusting here, apart from the murder, obviously, which the most abhorrent thing, is the way that the establishment is reacting. Because all these acts, everything that the establishment does sends signals. And you could say that this also is a characteristic of human action. No action is isolated. It always, let's say, reinforces a habit. So whenever the establishment does something, they are sending the message across. They're reinforcing something. And the immediate response was, on multiple levels, completely abhorrent. When it comes to the level of the police, he told them that he was stabbed. They didn't believe him. And instantly, their knee-jerk reaction was, well, the other guy is calling him racist. We don't want to be called racists. It's literally the worst thing in their minds to be called a racist. And so let's treat him as a sack of potatoes, because when someone tells you that they have been stabbed, you don't drag their body like that. Because if they are wounded and they're telling you that they're wounded, and you're not there as an activist who is trying to oversee race relations according to your bureaucrats' whims, you're there as a police force. You don't drag them like a sack of potatoes, because it could worsen their wounds. It could actually make them worse. So they didn't believe them. They didn't even check. Why? Because he used the word racist. And afterwards, you could see in the discourse, again, was about the far right and about how you should never question multiculturalism. And this happens also when we have terrorist hits in Europe. And I'll give you several examples. And there's a pattern. I have a post about it that I constantly repost every time it happens, because it's the same thing. About a month ago, there was a terrorist attack in Modena in northern Italy. There was again a car with mental illness, started going in a rampage, and there was I think it was a North African. I may be mistaken, but it's definitely within the MENAT sphere. He crushed a woman against a wall, and she was amputated instantly. The way that the establishment reacted was the same. It was the same also when we constantly encounter terrorist hits in Germany. What happens is the crime happens, takes place, and when it comes to the identity of the crime, first they're trying to gaslight people They're focusing on quantity of messaging, and they're saying somehow it's someone on the right. Like, for instance, was it last September or the September before? Someone, I think it was a Saudi, who ran over some people in a German market. For the first hours, they were implying that he was a right wing and a MAGA supporter.
Which is enough, just to jump in, which is enough of a signal to basically have, half the people not check the news again.
Yeah.
And so it's a deliberate lie, which allows some people to they then immediately assume that this is the case. And so you have people just operating on entirely different nuggets of information.
And then when the identity becomes visible, and the identity is almost always a part of the oppressed, according to the left, they're trying to isolate the incident. And they say, well, this is an isolated incident. It doesn't show any deeper pattern. And there a glaring double standard is the mildest criticism of multiculturalism is being treated not as an isolated incident, but as an indication of a far-right epidemic. And I'll tell you in a bit why I think they're doing this. And it has to do with the cynicism of wokeness. And then what they're doing is they are essentially trying to make statements of sympathy. And then they constantly talk about the far right and how the most important thing is for the far right to not rise. All this is done in order to divert people's attention away from the fact that several communities are per capita overrepresented in violent crimes. The instant reaction you're going to get when you're talking about crime in the oppressed, within quotation marks. They're not oppressed, they're incredibly entitled. When they do this, they say you're far right if you criticize them. And they constantly say, well, why don't you talk about crime when it comes to white people or the Brits or the Germans? And all this is besides the point. First of all, I've been accused of doing this, and I haven't. I have talked about crime that hasn't been committed by the MENA countries, people from the MENA communities. MENA, by the way, to those who listen, are Middle East and North African communities. Right. When it comes to that, I think that they are basically doing it for one purpose. The cynics know that the groups that they hold to be parts of the oppressed and as parts of the new revolutionary class, according to the eyes of the left, they're completely incompatible. You can't have a society with them. You can't have a society with actual Muslims and lesbians and trans people in the woke society. You can't have that. So the only way to momentarily diffuse tension within your camp, where the overwhelming majority of your camp wants to throw the rest from rooftops, is to tell them there's a common enemy. Who is the common enemy? The far right. That is why they constantly talk about the far right. They do it to galvanize their political allies and also to demoralize people from criticizing multiculturalism.
I also wanted to address this particular meme over here, the British state's core ideology, this big block over here of all these towers being held up by this little peg which says we coerced his parents into calling for calm. So is this something that happens in Britain when it comes to these incidents of migrant crime? Certain people would come over the houses of the parents and coerce them into not being that reactive towards what happened.
Yeah, I'm sure you get the PR assault, essentially. In Britain, it probably depends what class you're in. The more working class groups in society, because they've been vilified for a long time. I mean, a long time. Like you can go back to 18th century or 1800 newspapers in the 1800s. Well, you have a newspaper cartoon with like a picture of a statue of Queen Liberty or whatever looking out over to Africa, and then a little like homeless London kid being like, why don't you care about us here at home? So the working class, they are not so susceptible to the PR campaigns of like, make sure to cool for calm, keep calm and carry on, drink a cup of tea. But as you move up the class stratas in British society, like the PR is heavy on ensuring that you don't disrupt the multicultural agenda, because it's God. It's essentially a religion.
Not to quote Orwell, by the way, too much, because I know that he is overused. But what you said does remind me a bit of 1984 when it comes to how they handled people who were in the party as opposed to people who were like the pub drinking bunch of people, like the I think they use the term proles, if I'm not mistaken, where in a way they didn't really care so much about what the proles were doing or thinking, that they were relatively harmless, as opposed to the people within the party that needed to be ideologically ruled over.
Yeah, we have a very entrenched political hierarchy, and the proles haven't had political agency in, I don't know, basically ever. So they're largely irrelevant.
Do you think, this is going to sound a little bit controversial, but do you think that there may be certain components that even cross into certain genetic lineages or certain memetics being perpetuated, in terms of what families pass on to each other, going all the way back to ancient Britain when it comes to then the people who arrived there, like the Normans and so on and so forth?
Yeah, this is a good example, like the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons. So obviously the Normans, they didn't replace the English genetic pool, really, but they did replace the ruling class. But then the Norman, that's so long ago, but then you could make a slight correlation to the distinction between having basically two different.
Can I ask you something here, Orpheus? Because I've heard also this, and I've heard by several people that the majority of British monarchy ever since the Plantagenets was not ethnically English. I don't know if you think that's correct or not, but there is let's say that that's correct. There is a further issue here, is that if they are unsympathetic to the so-called proles, why is it that they are sympathetic to the proles of other groups?
Right. Yes, the British, well, all European monarchy is a sort of conglomeration of one large family or several large families.
By the way, I want to cut in here real quick. This is exactly the same situation in Imperial Russia. Back during that time, all of the Russian czars, they were, of German blood and Anglo-Saxon blood and so on and so forth.
Nicholas and George were cousins.
Yeah, absolutely. So there does seem to be, that kind of, globalistic ruling class thing going on here, for whatever reason.
Yes, yeah. Certainly, obviously, the Windsors were Saxe-Coburg-Gothas. That was their original name. They were German. Philip was Prince of Greece, and I believe he was. They were a Danish family.
Yeah,
could be wrong on that.
Then you had the House of Hanover.
Yes,
the Stuarts, who were basically Scottish.
Yeah, the Stuarts are Scottish. They married into the House of Hanover. The Plantagenets were also the Anjous, so they were the same family. So you had the Frankish family, the Anjous. I'm actually related to them very distantly, but and not in any significant way. And the British aristocracy in the 1800s were essentially, over the course of about 150 years, and we're not talking about the royal family, we're talking about the landed gentry, they were essentially replaced through marriage or through debt with American industrialist families. So you had a lot of intermarrying between financiers, steel magnates, into the British aristocracy. You had members of the British aristocracy that were so heavily in debt that they essentially sold their name to newcomers. So the British aristocracy from the middle of the 1800s are not British, in effect, you could say. Like, obviously some still are, but they got diluted to such an extent that it's not a surprise that they actually have no allegiance to their country whatsoever.
Is there also a connection between the Prophet Muhammad and the British royal family? I remember hearing something about
Genghis
some.
Khan.
I don't know. I have to look that up. But regardless, there has been this quality of somebody like King Charles of being this perennialist figure, where he, in a way, sees all religions as being connected and so on and so forth. And when you were talking before about well, why is it that they would go for the proles of the other countries? Maybe the reason is that the proles of the other countries would be maybe a better kind of people to rule over if you don't want people asking questions. If you look at the Middle Eastern nations, regardless of how much money they make, I don't think there's that much translation of books going on in those nations. And I think that's important.
The free man, the concept of the free man is so much stronger in European nations. Like you had obviously the Magna Carta in 1250 something. And then the law of the commons, there's an Anglo, is it an Anglo? It's a Saxon law, it's a Scandinavian law about not the distribution of land, but land is to be enjoyed by everyone within the nation. So there are these common laws that provide rivalry in Western Europe that you wouldn't get in the third world.
Lev, I don't think that's the case, because if you look at, let's say, Britain, the last civil war was in 1642 to 1649, and then you had basically Cromwell dying. His son comes in, and everyone understands he's not up to the task, and then you have the Stuarts coming back in. You don't have there is peace here. It's much easier to govern over people who are used to living in peace and want to prevent another war than it is to rule over people who are a bit more prone to violence. And so I don't think that the people from the MENA countries are better to rule over. I think, in fact, it's more difficult. It's when you think of, for instance, religious zealots. In some respects, you can completely overpower them militarily, but if you want to live with them and rule over them, they're not exactly people who are diplomatic and you can make deals with. So I don't think that that's what it is, personally.
So would you say that this is something that both of you would slightly disagree on? I know, Orpheus, would you lean into them being... Okay.
Not necessarily. It is. I don't really have an answer for why the ruling class detest the native British population to such an extent. Apart from the Fabian ideology, communist ideology that came in, but there was a precursor to that, in the extent that the British Empire was so readily given away. The case of Rhodesia is a fine example of how the ruling class in Britain could not bear that their own subjects would have a successful land in Africa that they didn't have a hand in. So I don't really know. I don't really have an answer for where that motivation comes from. But yeah,
I think in this conversation we may look at it in a more domestic sense when the problem is a bit more global, and I think it affects the Western world, not just Britain, because I think one of the reasons that we encounter constantly is that people who are in the, within quotation marks, high class, they frequently live in places where they don't encounter and they don't experience firsthand the kinds of problems we're talking about. I'm sure that, for instance, if you took members of the aristocracy you have in mind, and you took them to, let's say, some bad ghettos, I don't think they would say, hey, I like these people more than the average Brit, or more than the British working class. I really struggle to think that they'd say this. I'm much more inclined to believe that they are shielded from experiencing the outcomes of these policies. And because they're shielded from these policies and from the results of these policies, they are way more resistant and in listening about them. They aren't interested in listening about them because they will tell you, well, no, you are a racist. I know people from this or that background, and they aren't bad. And frequently, that's the thing, is that you don't have to be a racist to make a claim to say that multiculturalism is not a cure for all. And here, I think here is where a lot of the focus has to be, because one of the main grievances I have against right-wingers who talk about multiculturalism, I mean, it's not that much of a grievance. I'm just saying that's more of a philosophical point, but I think it's important to understand what we're talking about. You frequently hear about right-wingers saying that, no, I'm not an ideologue. I've read some Burke, I've read some Oakeshott. I'm not an ideologue. I don't think in terms of universals. I'm focusing much more on the concrete and the particular. So when it comes to multiculturalism, they frequently talk in a very general way. Now, multiculturalism, and this prevents them from making a good case against particular multicultural experiments. Culture is something really elusive. Some people define it as works of art, good opera, or high class stuff. But when we're talking about people in multiculturalism, we're talking about ways of life. We're talking about ways in which groups behave. Now, it depends. Whenever we're talking about multiculturalism, we're talking about specific multicultural experiments. And that's important because when you make this case on such terms, you're making the other person who will scream that you're racist able to see, or at least you waste some of their momentum, you destroy some of their momentum by, for instance, asking them really simple things. Can you coexist with cannibals, for instance? Well, the answer is no. Everyone will tell you no. Why can't you coexist with cannibals? Well, what's the principle behind your negative answer? Well, they say, yeah, they're going to eat me. Well, yeah, but this is that's them practicing their culture.
Yeah, who are you to judge?
Who are you to judge? Yeah, they'll say, well, perhaps we have tremendous value discontinuities between our value systems, our respective value systems, and coexistence can't take place. Coexistence among different groups requires a continuity of values that is going to inspire and inform the common rules that have to be at place in order to govern a society that is multicultural and multi-ethnic. And one of the things before that I think it's an interesting case to make is that two things. When it comes to Europe, European cultures are different. I'm sure the Swedes and the Finns view each other completely differently. I have a friend who is a Finn. He tells me that they treat the Swedish as a bit more hot-tempered, and they treat themselves as a bit more intellectual. Then I have other Swedes telling me that, well, yeah, the Finn kind of has a point. Every European culture is different, and within each culture there are subcultures. But the continuities between these cultures allow them to coexist in ways that you can't coexist with cultures that treat the values that Europeans accept as the common framework that is going to govern coexistence, they think that these values are demonic.
Well,
and the other bit, just
Sure.
and I put I'll put a full stop here. You could say that Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew is an example of a country that had multiple ethnicities, each of which practiced their culture, and that wasn't always peaceful, and that this led to a police state of the kind that we presumably don't want in the West. So,
like if you get caught with drugs, they would kill you, that kind of thing.
Or yeah, if you, and it's a police state.
Yeah,
you can enjoy good things there. You can enjoy order, peace. I'm not trashing Singapore, but I'm saying that what functioned as a solution to Singapore isn't something that presumably Europeans want for their countries.
I agree. And this is maybe, I don't know if I'll find another disagreement with you and Orpheus when it comes to how exactly we restore the social contract. But before we get to that, I want to put up a case study over here of this particular girl. Her name is Grace Ryan. As you can see over here, she's very, pretty looking, redhead, looks very aristocratic.
Ginger.
Over here it says progressive politics, urbanism, college football. So she's like a New York lefty. And this I found to be very interesting. Over here we have a post from her. I spend my summers wearing American flag sweaters and long skirts, and I'm literally a progressive political operative. So you could see over here how she is, in her own, secluded, wherever she happens to be over here, this kind of Elysium type of area. It doesn't really comport to the kind of people that she would want to bring into New York City. So when we're talking like, who are these people that are so against, the native people of their country? Here is an example. And I'm just curious, what do you guys see in the mentality of this kind of person? It doesn't seem to be cynical. She seems to be a true believer, but at the same time, wearing the American flag shirt, smoking a stogie over here, there may be a part of her that yearns for maybe some kind of a more of a traditional aristocratic existence, despite her horrible politics. So I don't know what you guys think here.
I think yes, I would agree with you. I think people in most liberals are generally insincere. Like if they have enough resources, they will live a life that is posh and extremely comfortable, and they can be just champagne socialists on the side to make them feel good. Because they too have been inculcated into the idea of white guilt, essentially, which is a very powerful meme. I would say when it comes to the true European aristocracy, whom I've met, a lot of them, not a lot of them, but I've had time in my life when I was friends with, you would really consider ex-Eton or Harrow kids who come from very wealthy families, and they have like the loveliest sisters, and they're like extremely distant from normal society, in a way that makes them extremely ditzy. Like they're not actually tapped into what's happening in the world. They're not sycophants, really. They just have no contact with regular life, because they do have 5 houses, one in Monte Carlo and wherever. The sycophants are the middle class, the upper middle class, or the strivers, and particularly female counterparts within that class. And they're more like this girl, really, where they don't really have a place so much in society, so they LARP as upper class, but also try to bring everyone down to their own mediocrity. I'm being a bit harsh, but if you know what I mean.
I don't think you are harsh, and I've experienced some things. I've seen things you people would definitely believe. So there's this thing here, because I think the other feature of wokeness is what it does. And I'm not going to give you the tired, the purpose of a system is what it does, but I'll tell you what I've seen in academia, for instance. To a very large extent, sadly, wokeness is a white, anti-white thing. You very frequently have white people talking about how bad they feel for being white and how bad they feel for being a member of the white race, and how they think that they have to atone for this guilt by being silent about the Arab slave trade, for instance. That's the implications. They don't say this explicitly. But one thing to put forward, which absolutely ties into what you said, Orpheus, before, was the answer to the question, why did they do it? And I think it's very simple. In academia, for instance, you have insane competition. It's, in some respects, you could say it resembles the Squid Game. Not that people die, but you do have factions forming within academia, just like they had before the games on Squid Game, who are trying to completely assassinate the careers of other people. And one of the things was Encounter, for instance. I didn't exactly make friends in academia. And the first thing that happened in my first day during the PhD was I had an exchange about I had a sort of very nasty exchange with someone, a student syndicalist, who now is working there, by the way. He was talking to me about how Black people are underrepresented in academia. More than 10 years have gone by. There aren't Black people in that department, and there aren't in most departments. But why did he do it? Well, because if you have 30 people and sometimes 100 people competing for one position, not everyone is going to think that they're going to be the top, that they're going to get position number one, and that they're going to get it based on their merit. So some of them who understand that they are not going to stand out with their research, suddenly they become DI officers, and they say, well, no, I deserve the spot in academia because you may be doing great work, but the work you're doing is reinforcing a racist, misogynist, ultimately guilt institution, whereas I'm offering absolution and atonement. And sadly, these people frequently get the position. And the other bit is that with wokeness, you can essentially dominate any space. Why? Because when you have objective rules, and what do I mean by that? Not something terribly philosophical, but rules whose violation can be established by means of publicly accessible criteria. For instance, when you're talking about don't kill, that's the law. There are publicly accessible criteria that with respect to whether you have actually killed or not killed a particular person. It's not just, hey, Orpheus, I don't like you, so I'm going to accuse you of being a killer, and then you aren't going to be able to prove that you're not an elephant. That's what wokeness does. It moves from criteria of this sort, which do foster a notion of fair play, and a sense that, well, even if you want to destroy the other person's career, you at least have to do it in a way that, you have to demonstrate excellence in at least some respect. When you have subjective rules, everyone is guilty by default. The presumption of innocence has turned into the presumption of guilt, and whoever is occupying the top position, whoever is the leader somewhere, is able to judge for how long some people are going to get away with breaking the rules that are specifically designed to make everyone guilty by default. So it's like, from rules that aren't always violated, and that the threshold of violating it is high, we've gone to everyone is guilty by default. And if I am the leader of that department, that business, that or the country or the party, I choose to say say for how long you're going to be pronounced innocent, for how long you're going to get away with it. If you aren't my political friend, I'll essentially say that you're violating these rules.
How does that quote go? For my enemies the law, and for my friends everything, or the other way around? For my friends everything, for my enemies the law. Is that from Mussolini or from Franco? I think it's
isn't
Franco.
that Napoleon? Isn't that Napoleon?
I have to check, but that does bring me to something that I wanted to discuss here, as far as, well, how do we restore the social contract and get out of this state of anarcho tyranny when it comes to England, when it comes to the West as a whole? Because back during the day, during the Polyakov days, when BTR first started off, there were a lot of people. I mean, Orpheus, you remember Sonny, right? And
yes,
Sonny,
yeah.
very extreme gentleman there. Interesting Aryan cowboy, also really interesting. But I think the vibe back then was that we're heading into the Kali Yuga, and we need to accelerate in order to go through it out to the other side, out to the Satya Yuga, the age of truth. The whole grand cycles of history, they rotate. So we have to just go through all of these horrible things that we're experiencing now, and the faster we go through it, the better. And the problem that I have with that is that it's a little bit too romantic, and it doesn't factor in, well, what about all of the good people that are alive today that are going to get needlessly hurt by any kind of extreme ideology? Are we sure that we want to go into a direction where we end up solving a headache by chopping off our own head with the guillotine? And this is always something that, it's not really easy to say, because if there is a gradient where on one side you have diplomacy and talking it out and, listening to reason, and on the other side, you just have pure savage violence, there is no more room for discussion. Where exactly do you see society being when it comes to the reaction to Henry Nowak's death? And where do you see society being as reacting to this in such a way as to actually make good change? Do you see it in the realm of discussion, forming coalitions, going through the art of the possible, which is politics? Or do you see that as just being a dog and pony show for the sake of, people making money through podcasts in the meanwhile, while kind of waiting it out until things get really, really bad, and then, whoever is the strongest gangster ends up taking charge?
Well, the thing about accelerationism is, it begs the question, is there actually a bottom? Like, do we ever reach a bottom that is bad enough that we can accelerate to bounce off of and create change? I think it was C.S. Lewis that said, like, there is no depth to the depravity that we can go to. And when you have civilizations in sort of terminal decline, it can take decades to actually have like a collapse where a new Caesar comes in or a new warlord, like, and then it starts upon like hard order to create a new civilization. Like you can literally just have a civilization that is functionally incapable of doing anything but can still subsist, where it just becomes unlivable in an ostensible way. Like the US Postal Service doesn't work, but it's not, and it's dangerous to go out, but it's just a third world country at that point. And providing that there's enough order in certain respects, it can maintain like that for 30, 40, 50 years. And so accelerationism, like, is hope, like you said, it could be, it's romantic and it's not actually going to get anywhere. What do I see about particularly what's happening with Henry Nowak is this is the first time that I'm seeing actual sincere shock and demand for something different, because Henry Nowak is not the first case of Henry Nowak. Like there's been similar cases in Britain in the last 5 years, literally carbon copies, and all over Europe actually. But this is the first one that has got any sort of sincere, like full-blown outrage, which is deserving, of course. So this does feel like a little bit of a watershed moment. I don't want to be overly optimistic. I have been in the past, and like you get swept up in online furor, and it doesn't actually translate towards being felt in real life. But for example, in Stockholm yesterday, there was a march for Henry Nowak, which is pretty impressive. Stockholm is not like, they've never done something like that before. You'll find pro-Palestine marches happening every weekend, but this is the first one that has been like a, let's say, right-wing cause. And that was mirrored in other cities all over Europe. So it's more of a critical mass occurring here than it has been previously. And I used to be the sort of person that would say there is no political solution to this kind of decline. But Restore do seem to be the closest thing that we've had to anything that is truly like sensible, fair, and like actually represents the nativist groups in society.
Restore Britain. So for those who don't know, what exactly is Restore? How is it different from, let's say, the Nigel Farage wing that existed before?
So Restore is run by Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe is an MP, but he's a businessman as well. It's the first party that's come out and said, we don't care if you call us racist. That is just a made up, like, it has no meaning anymore. It's a voodoo word. It's the purpose of it is programming and to elicit emotional response. It's not actually representative of reality in any way, and therefore we don't care what you call us. These are our policies, and obviously it's based fundamentally on the problem of migration. But beyond that, Rupert Lowe and Restore is galvanizing people who haven't been interested in politics for 2 or 3 decades, which is like, I mean, that's massive. Like the average voter turnout in the UK is, I mean, we barely had an election in the last 15 years, but average voter turnout is like 50, 60%. So you have, a third or more of the population who aren't even participating in politics, because British politics has less glamour than American politics, and it's just so painful to watch politicians in the Houses of Parliament. So for the first time, and this compares with Reform. Reform, Nigel Farage, one way of putting it could be that if your politician can be easily caricatured like a Punch and Judy cartoon, then there's something not quite trustworthy about them. Nigel Farage is that kind of character. Like he has, and the same with Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak. They have that guffawing insincerity. This is my personal opinion.
But I do like with Johnson that he supported Ukraine, that he was also able to recite the Iliad in the original Greek. I thought that was pretty nice.
He's publicly British educated. So like,
yeah, but he presided over the Boris wave.
Yeah, more immigration came in under Boris than before. Like it's
why do you think that is?
Because they're cynical. They like there is an agenda. No, there's an immigration agenda, essentially, to slowly replace the native population. Again, we could go into what those reasons are, but we end up talking about conspiracies, and like that's, although there's probably quite a lot of validity to that, it's not that helpful.
Well, I can bring certain examples which I think that people who otherwise would not be that into a lot of the conspiracy ideas would be a bit more receptive to, just because of the unfortunate splitting that we've had, especially with something like Ukraine, for instance. So Angela Merkel, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with, who was one of the biggest people, I think, responsible for the wave of migrants coming into Germany in 2015. So she was a member and local youth leader of the Freie Deutsche Jugend, FDJ, the Free German Youth. So this was a communist youth organization in East Germany. And East Germany is a very important thing to add here, because we also have people who she worked with, like Matthias Waring. He was a former captain in the East German Stasi, and he became the CEO of Nord Stream. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that because there's been this split, and I think that some of the more right-wing people in Britain as well have unfortunately been swept up in Russian propaganda. There's been this split where, let's say, the people who were supporting Ukraine were not really on board with a lot of the things that we're talking about right now when it comes to the migrant issues. Ironically so, because Russia's also been weaponizing migrants. They've been arresting Russian sailors the past decade that were transporting migrants from Greece into Italy, I believe, as well as many other such cases. And when I think of the kind of information that people would have on somebody like Angela Merkel, by people I mean, the Russian government, because she worked in the Stasi, meaning she was associated with the USSR. So they definitely have a file on this woman. And I don't think it's a coincidence that somebody like her was able to let in all of these migrants, because at the end of the day, something like that does benefit Russia, does benefit this kind of Eurasianism that people like Alexander Dugin are talking about. And I think for a long time, unfortunately, people who were further on the right have also, because who else were you going to go to? They were attracted by a lot of Russian influence, took money from the Russians, and as a result, a lot of the things they were talking about was in relation to, forget about Ukraine, that's just like this regional issue. Let's just focus on our domestic policies. Even though at the end of the day, what do we have? We have most of the European army being absolutely, I'm sorry to say, pathetic in relation to what the Ukrainians were able to achieve in such a short time, especially when it comes to something like drone warfare. So at the end of the day, much like we could say that Gaddafi and Libya was the shield keeping a lot of the migrants from going into Europe, Ukraine is the shield right now, keeping this expansionist force, which, again, I'm sorry to all the doubters here, but the Russian politicians, including Putin himself, have talked about how this isn't about Ukraine. This is about the expansion of the Russian Empire, and no matter what concession you're going to give these people, they're going to keep going until they're stopped.
By the way, have you noticed how the EU thinks that the only borders of Europe that are important are the borders between Poland and Belarus? That's where Putin is using migration flows to wage hybrid warfare against Europe to destabilize European countries. But for some reason, it's only Putin that's the problem. One thing, I think it's Putin's Russia is a problem. It's not the only problem. I think that it's very bad for the right to have treated everyone who said this as a Zelensky shield and listen to nothing about the issue. It did happen in online discourse, and now I'm happy to see that people have started talking about the kind of divide and conquer of Dugin's Eurasianism and how this influences other spaces, let's say. But you raise so many issues there. I want to make some comments.
Sure. Go for it.
Right, Kali Yuga. Let's start at the beginning. I think that we need to distinguish two things here from a philosophical perspective. One is whether this is actually the case, and the other is the practical question. The question of whether it's the case or not, what should we do? I'm really interested in the cyclical views of time and history, and I don't think they are 100% correct. I think they do have something to be said for them, but I don't buy them 100%. But let's assume that a cyclical view of history is correct, and that the every society goes through a sort of cycle like the one Polybius is describing in the histories, which, by the way, is a cycle he's describing of unmixed constitutions, and he's talking about it in the context of a book, a treatise, trying to answer to why did Rome last for so long, and the answer was because they had a mixed constitution. Also, just let me say, I really like Aristotle. I can give you several examples of how the cycle didn't exactly work. So it's much more of a scheme that it allows us to understand some things. But let's say something of the sort is the case. It doesn't change anything from a practical perspective. So, right, we are human beings. We're not going to live forever. Does that mean that we should accelerate our demise? So, in a way, even if we are destined or fated to decline, that doesn't answer from a moral and practical perspective of what are we to do. That's why I think that irrespective of what is the case metaphysically speaking, it's important to try to at least make the most of our time and live like Chads as opposed to live
like kings, yeah,
or Kangs or something.
Kangs, exactly.
So whether it's the case or not, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows, because it's a metaphysical question, and we can have lots of circumstantial evidence that could support it, but we could never be absolutely certain. Well, even if it existed, we can be certain of our own demise, and our own demise doesn't give us moral reason to accelerate our own demise. Right, okay. So, in that respect, I think that we should try to, in a way, to be a force for actual progress. But even if we are, I don't think that any kind of civil war or something of the sort is likely to happen, at least in the foreseeable future. Something we need to bear in mind is that there is a discrepancy between the reflexes of an online audience and the reflexes of a society at large. So this is one of the major mistakes that many people who are terminally online, and I don't necessarily use that in a pejorative way, but one of the things that they forget, if they show a video of a particular crime, let's say someone, what happened now in Modena, to any person, then they are going to say, well, 99% of the people I show this turn, let's say, far right. And by that, obviously, that's a stupid word. I mean, people say, right, we need to do something about it, multiculturalism doesn't work, we at least have to renegotiate the terms of coexistence and be open to the question of, moving further if there aren't any good results after that negotiation. The point is that the terminally online people will occupy a space, an online space, where they are constantly going to be bombarded by events of this sort, which do happen. The problem with society at large is that if you show them things, they will react like that, but after 10 minutes, they're going to completely forget it. They're going to carry on with their lives. And I'm not saying that this is something that is an indication of a bad person or a stupid person or something. It's just, this is something that those of us who are online a lot have to understand about people who aren't online that much. Any person you show them a crime being documented of the kind that the mainstream media would try to memory hole will have the, relatively speaking, a good reaction, and a reaction that is going to be against the system. The problem is 10 minutes afterwards they're going to forget it, and especially even if they don't forget it, when they vote they're going to think twice.
Do you not think that in England, because I was going to say, if there was going to be a colour revolution, it would start in Britain and then it would bleed out into the rest of Europe. Every weekend in the summer for last year, and I'm sure this year, there are demonstrations. And that's obviously the sign that didn't happen 10 years ago. It started happening 10 years ago when demonstrations, like actual sort of migration demonstrations and stuff like that. But now it's becoming really consistent. So when you say you don't think there's going to be any sort of civil revolution.
Wait. Sorry, I said civil war.
Civil war. Okay.
Obviously, there are people who are waking up to it. And I'll just give you an example. When there was the Raise the Flag days, there were places I went to. I've told you before, I travel across the country almost every weekend because I really love driving and I love visiting places. Almost every roundabout I encountered in several routes was painted with the English flag. Not the British, the English. So yeah, people definitely pay attention and they're becoming more politicized. And one thing to say is that I do think that, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that in British culture, there was a tendency to defer to the government. And there was much more trust to the government than you see, for instance, in France, where, Paris burns every other week.
Paris burns if they win a football match or if they lose, it doesn't matter.
Yes. So it definitely this definitely seems to be changing. I don't think that is going to result in a civil war of the kind that many people online are talking of the kind, that you mentioned before, snipers on the rooftops, hot oil, trenches.
There is an important question, though. There is an important question when it comes to something like Islam, because let's say if we're talking about the British citizens who are of Indian origin, I'm pretty sure that like a lot of them have lived in England for a pretty long time now. I'm talking about people who go, all the way back from the imperial time, who moved to England. Where from my conversations with English friends, they say that a lot of those Indian migrants, specifically like Hindu, that they've become British. They consider themselves to be British. They may have, their little traditions here and there, but it's not that big of a situation as it is, let's say, with the Muslim migrants, especially migrants from Pakistan, for instance, who, as we were talking about in the beginning, have their own thing going on the side. So the real important question here for me has to do with, what do you do in the situation where you have a whole bunch of people whose political ideology, because Islam, at the end of the day, it's not just a religion, it's also a political ideology, whose political ideology has them within the Dar al-Islam, House of Islam, versus Dar al-Harb, House of War, wherein the people who are around them who are not Muslim would be enemy combatants. And if that's the kind of reality that exists, you could say, mimetically within the madrasas, it may not really be something that some, young Muslim dudes who are, vaping and drinking alcohol and whatever, that may not be something that they're thinking about like a terminally online person 24/7. But at the same time, is that still something that has the potential to be activated when tensions get high? And if so, what exactly would be the responses?
If the economic situation gets bad enough, which it could well do, I haven't been keeping up to date most recently about what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz, but let's say energy becomes so expensive, the economic situation gets bad enough, everyone's will balkanize. And I don't know what will happen between different factions of Islam within the UK. I don't know enough about their cultures, but balkanization is inevitable. And then, I'm maybe I'm too terminally online, but like I foresee there being more potential for a civil war. Maybe not in the next 5 years, but in the next 10. Civil war, civil conflict.
Well, here's a controversial question. So, when it comes to people who are civic-minded, pillars of the community, responsible elites, they went to Eton, very well educated. When it comes to people like that, they would be reluctant from doing anything that would be considered to be illiberal. And I can sympathize with that, since I don't want to chop the metaphorical head off when there's a headache. But when it comes to them not responding in certain ways where maybe it would make sense to respond, they would be giving ground to a future where the only people that end up responding would be the thugs, would be the criminals who are strong, who have guns stashed away. They end up being the people that end up taking power when the responsible elites don't want to do things that they would be considering to be bad, malevolent, authoritarian, however you want to call it. So it's almost like if we don't do certain things right now with people who are responsible, are we not leaving this opportunity to the people who are irresponsible, who only want power and control, and end up becoming tyrants, and the situation, gets even worse?
Depends on their personal allegiance to society. The UK has had the most amount of millionaires and billionaires emigrate out of the country than any other country in the last 10 years. So a lot of people are abandoning ship. Maybe that would change if a government which was more friendly to their tax bracket came in, but and then you're going to have people who are actually patriotic. I think Restore is, again, maybe I'm too online, but I think a lot of people are looking at Restore as the last chance of any sort of meaningful change. I don't know. What do you think, Stelios?
Yeah.
So when it comes to Restore, I will say several things. Number one, I remember being on the podcast on Lotus Eaters more than about a year ago, when Rupert Lowe was in Reform, and I did say that I do think that he has leadership quality, and at the moment I don't think that people agreed with me. Second, I know several of the people involved in Restore. Some of them I consider to be my friends. And a personal way, not just we know each other in spaces. I will be constructively critical, and I will say one thing: draft the policy. The sooner they do it, the better, because people will get a better idea of what they have to offer, how they differ from Reform. And yes, so, and everyone will understand, where they do this, because fundamentally one of the issues with reform is that it seems to me a person bound party. It's like people either like or dislike Farage, and many people in Restore dislike Farage. But that said, I want to be, I'm not a propagandist. I'm an analyst. That's how I want to be present online, and that's how the people who know me. So I wait to see the policy that they're going to draft. But generally speaking, I'm optimistic. I will say this: I'm optimistic. If it's the last hope of the country or not, again, I said I don't think things are that bad as some other people believe. I may be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong in this case, but it seems to me that it's on the one hand, it's good to create a sense of urgency for the next elections. But on the other hand, it's always important to keep a plan B and understand that if 2029 comes and Restore isn't the next government, but it has a strong presence in the parliament, then that's a new reality that they will have to, for instance, take advantage of, instead of going, right, guys, it's too late, let's try to organize a sort of armed thing, which obviously I'm not saying they're going to do this. I'm not saying they should do this. I'm just saying that on the one hand, I appreciate the fact that from a rhetorical perspective, a sense of urgency has to be fostered in order to get people to vote. But on the other hand, I think that it's important to also maintain an element of realism and understand that a strong presence of Restore in the new parliament could be a very good thing. And if they don't become the government in the next election, they could become the government in future elections and actually solve the issue. I think that I will say this, and it's not at all intended to be an insult. I think that there is a tendency from people, especially in the Anglosphere, to present a situation worse than it is. Now, that has some goods and bads. First of all, I think that, I've seen really bad things, let's say. So I know for a fact that the bottom of the barrel hasn't been encountered yet, let's say.
Well, you're Greek, so you understand 50% unemployment in Greece, so maybe bad isn't as...
I don't... Now it's not 50, but yeah, I have seen things, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the other hand, there is also that's also a good part, because it means there's a lower threshold of tolerance and lower tolerance to subversive things. So on the one hand, I'd say that from a practical perspective, it's good to sound the alarm, but from a realistic perspective, it's good also to be a bit more relaxed, and also to understand that I genuinely think that things are not as bad as many people say. That by that I mean that they're salvageable. That's what I mean.
Right.
I want to push back a little bit on this just slightly and address the elephant in the room, which I alluded to earlier. And I want to contrast what Orepheus was saying when it comes to the economy getting really bad. And that's when we have all this discombobulation going on in Britain and the West as a whole, which, yes, we can definitely have that kind of situation. But I feel like a lot of people completely ignore the other way things would go, which is something that's much slower and actually much more calmer and, peaceful. Wherein, let's say you're an imam of a mosque in, I don't know, part of Britain, Nottingham or whatever, I don't know. And thinking about Robin Hood right now. And having some young guy who's radicalized online, who becomes a terrorist, is probably the worst thing you could possibly hope for. You don't want any of these terrorists. You don't want any of these bombings. No. What you want is, in respect to your political system, you want the Ummah. You want Dar al-Islam. You want the House of Islam. You want the expansion of your political ideology because you consider that to be the complete ideology for mankind. It's the only one that's correct. It's the only truth. So what you would want is actually peace, stability, and the expansion of your ideology throughout. And this is the really, really hard question, because what we're up against then is not, people that are doing, terroristic activity or whatever. No, we're meeting up a completely different culture that slowly but surely gets itself into various parts of the governmental system.
Well, Lev,
And yes,
it's just predicated on demographics, and this is where I'd push back on what Stelios said. And this is the last thing I'll say, because I'm gonna leave soon. It's almost 11 here, and I've got to get up early tomorrow morning. But the demographic situation in Britain is bad, especially in the younger generation. Like, it is, we have one generation left, and then we will be like a minority. That is bad. And once you're a minority, and the immigrant population who have been told their entire lives that you are the source of their ills becomes a majority population, there's no getting back without violence. That's just fundamental. Like, demography is destiny. And like with Lev, as you were saying, if the imam of whatever, I don't know exactly what we're talking about, but if they want peace and stability, they achieve their peace and stability through demographic dominance, essentially, and that's what they get. If the demographics are not reversed,
and also control of the institutions.
Yes, yeah. Well, again, you control the institution by having the majority, ultimately. And then the other thing about it not being so bad, it isn't so bad in the Cotswolds. It isn't so bad in parts of London. It isn't so bad in Canterbury or Bath or Bristol. But there are towns in England, and I would say you should go and watch Edward Dutton's documentary if you haven't seen it before.
You can watch Bradford near Leeds.
Yeah, Bradford. But there are towns of all sizes which are ghost towns. Like, they're the equivalent of like a mining town in West Virginia that nobody lives in apart from like your hillbillies, basically, and there's zero industry. And there's towns speckled around England just like this. Like, you have to go and find them, and the only people that live there are the native white English, and like there is zero hope in those towns. So you go there, it is bad. Nobody wants to live there. That's what I would say. I'd say the demographics, and there are like instances, but of course, if you live in places where there are industry and there is money, it doesn't feel bad. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But it depends what you want for your people and your civilization.
Well, Orpheus, before
I didn't say. Sorry, apologies. But I didn't say that demographically speaking, the situation isn't bad. One thing I was responding to, and that's apologies, because it's something also that I respond to. I frequently encounter this, and I'm trying to tell people that, for instance, it doesn't mean that if just from a purely theoretical perspective, it doesn't mean that the next elections are the final elections that will ever matter. That's what I mean.
You're right. It doesn't mean that it's not salvageable.
Yeah.
And I agree with.
Well, Orpheus, before you go, the last thing that I wanted to ask you, going back to what I was proposing earlier about the responsible elites, if we see that these demographic situations are going to pose these problems that you've been talking about, if we see the slow and steady and very peaceful capture of institutions by people whose culture and ideology is incompatible with the West, then can something be done as far as avoiding there being some absolutely bloodthirsty criminal tyrant who ends up being the only one with the guts to oppose this in some future time? As opposed to that, is there any way that the people who did attend Eton and were part of all these great institutions, is there any way to get them on board with this, not because they want to do things that they would find to be oppressive, but purely from seeing like what are the choices that we have in front of us, what do we want to preserve, how do we go about preserving this in such a way that we're not going to become tyrants towards people who, let's say, regardless of the color of their skin or whatever, actually do want to integrate and want to be the absolute best example of Western values as possible. So like in my ideal world, I would want those people to be a part of our society. As far as if you have what it takes to be a part of the society, if you integrate yourself, then absolutely fine. There's no problem at all. Meanwhile, if you're actively campaigning against the society, if you want to have a completely different society, then no, you are not welcome. Like, is there a possible way that the people who understand that can get on board with trying to figure this out and not shy away from this elephant in the room of the demographic changes that we were talking about?
Yeah, there are so many freeloaders in British English society that have to be dealt with, like they have to be removed. And obviously, criminal, like foreign criminal syndicates that operate. And in my opinion, you have to be extremely harsh with those groups in society. If you can on the other end of the spectrum, if you can galvanize the public school rugby boys to like, who are like a lot of them, like they're sort of well-bred. They got the best of what English society offered, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And traditionally they've just been all conservative, politically speaking, part of the like Tory party. The problem is it's a generational thing. The boomer generation, it is very hard to persuade them to not be part of the Tory club. Like my will be father-in-law, he's part of a club in London.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thanks. And it was hard enough for him to galvanize the old boys to move from Tory to Reform, just for no other reason than they're Tories, and they've been Tories for 25, 30 years. So it's too much of a step. I was talking to him about it. I was like, but Reform aren't it. Like, Restore more it. And it was too much of a step for him to even consider, like, trying to persuade anyone to come to Restore. But if the next generation down, younger than the boomers, if the culture changes in that like generation, let's say like 25 to 40 years old, and it becomes more nationalistic, and they like shake off the oppressive yoke of the woke, essentially, and they say, actually, we do have a right to self-determination. The liberal zeitgeist and the liberal mindset is a failed experiment. Actually, we don't need to apologize for everything. If they can become more galvanized to be more nationalistic and patriotic, then you could change it around, because they are still actually the most successful group in society.
And that would still make them liberal in the sense of the liberals from the 1800s or 1900s, I'd say. Like, that word, unfortunately, I think it's been misused to imply, the kind of commie leftist mentality, which ends up being anti-liberal. I mean, we all know that, at this point. It's kind of an old thing.
Yeah,
but
they mistake Keir Starmer for being a liberal. Keir Starmer is far left. Yeah. Keir Starmer is a Bolshevik. Well, he's a Trotskyite communist. But people are just politically illiterate, me included. Like, I didn't think about this properly until a couple of years ago. So it's a mirage, really, and people can't see the woods from the trees.
Well, what you are thinking about properly is putting on the orange glasses at a later time of the day, which is something that I probably have to do as well. So before you go, Orpheus, I wanted to ask just two quick things about health advice for all the people that are watching here. I know it's completely unrelated to what we were talking about before, but you are a person who's extremely physically fit. And I think that your advice is gold. So when it comes to general fitness, there has been this thing on X recently where people were talking against the starting strength protocol when it comes to doing, 5 reps and 5 sets, and using a GOMAD where you take in a lot of calories. So instead of that, people are talking about now, doing more reps, not injuring yourself, not tiring out yourself too much. What are your thoughts on that approach, as well as where do you get your glasses, and where do you recommend people go to for managing these light spectrum situations in our modern age?
The glasses that these are, if you're English or if you live in Britain, you can buy these. I'm not like a rep of this at all, but there's good designs. They're good. They're called blue light, blue light. You can get that on the internet. I think it's like £70 for a pair of these. In terms of starting strength, like in terms of the best training mechanism, I would say sprints is the most underrated and the most anabolic. So having like a once a week, twice a week, like short sprint regime, only like 10-15 minutes. If you're asking for like a
I know it's a very vast library.
Can I eat fish and chips after a workout?
You eat fish and chips after a workout. Well, unfortunately, they'll be cooked in seed oils, which is highly inflammatory. I would suggest buying your own meat and cooking it in lard or butter. Potatoes, if like one of the best things also that I do every day is actually literally just potatoes, but you want to cook them and then cool them down, and then you can cook them again, and it becomes starch resistant, and so your body can digest it a lot better.
Are you on board with the Ray Peat and the ingestion of, let's say, sugary substances before your workout for energy?
Yes, I eat Haribo when I work out. You know what Haribo is?
No, what is that?
You probably don't have that in America. I actually have some.
And by the way, for the people who want to support this show, who are watching, patreon.com/breaktherules. Haribo. Okay, what is this? Is this gummy bears?
It's like gelatin gummy bears. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's accepted. Or eating any sort of candy mid-workout is actually really great.
So you're not too keen on the whole keto thing when it comes to having the body utilize fat storage, because I guess in the minds of some people they would think, well, this is how I lose fat. All of this fat would melt away as soon as I have to use them for energy. But at the same time, muscles are also eaten away, from what I understand, when you're in a state of ketosis.
Yeah. I did keto 8 years ago. It worked, but I just didn't continue there. Honestly, I have quite a simple structure to what I eat. In the first half of the day, I really just have fruit. And then I still drink raw eggs. Not every day, but I've had periods when I've gone weeks where I've drank raw eggs every day. Other than that, potatoes, meat, broccoli, asparagus, like some sort of simple carb, simple vegetable. I make a lot of tartare because I do like raw meat. I'm not like as intense about it as someone like Solbra, for example, if you know.
Yeah.
He's a big raw meat guy, but I will eat a lot of steak tartare. And you got to make it nice. You got to put Liam Perrins in it, Worcester sauce and some Tabasco.
Making me hungry.
Tabasco, shallots, capers, little pickles. You got to do it properly. Other than that, it's really simple. I do eat a lot of ice cream. This is what I advocate for. Haagen-Dazs ice cream. You can eat a lot of that. I call it brain cream because it's really good for your brain.
Nice. And speaking of ice cream, by the way, big ice cream aficionado, Lomez is going to be also somebody that I'm going to be seeing in a couple of days. I'm going to this conference. So for those who don't know, this is my last plug of the day. And by the way, I would love for you guys to plug in as well. But over here really quickly, I am going to Washington, D.C. in a couple of days. This is going to be on the 10th. I'm going to this event over here, part of the Independent Women's Forum, America's Adversaries, the Russia Reality, a national security briefing. And so we got Megan Mobbs, General Keith Kellogg, Marissa Streit, Chief Executive Officer of Prager University, Alexander Usyk. I may have an opportunity to speak to Alexander Usyk there as well. Representative Pat Harrington, Caitlin Doornbos, New York Post Foreign Policy National Security. So you can see a lot of very interesting people. And as I mentioned before, Alexis Wilkins. She is the fiance, by the way, of Kash Patel. So a lot of interesting people here that I will have an opportunity to speak with. Good friend Park McDougald. He was on BTR as well. James Lindsay. I've never spoken to James Lindsay yet, so I hope that this will be changed. So yeah, a lot of very interesting people here. Nate Vance, the cousin of J.D. Vance, and he also was a volunteer in Ukraine. So, and also, as I mentioned before, Curtis Yarvin. So I'm going to be organizing a panel with Curtis Yarvin at the end of this particular conference. So, yeah, this is going to be a very interesting moment for BTR. Let's see exactly what this is going to lead up to. But yeah, as far as what you guys are doing, I know Orepheus, you sell really beautiful jewels and pendants. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a jewelry company, but it is also a technology. We developed what would be called a bioresonant technology. So it's frequency engineering. We program a mineral, take it through the 7 stages of alchemy, where you basically dissolve and break down this mineral, and then it's programmed with frequencies from arbitrary waveform generators, and then built back up over 28 days. We put this in a pendant, and it emits stable, coherent frequency waveforms into your body, and it basically improves your health. We got it tested in a cell biology lab in Germany. It increases the speed of cellular regeneration. It reduces oxidative stress, and increases cellular vitality, which is like basal cellular metabolism. So it is a bridge between fashion and health. It's pretty woo-woo for your standard person. They often don't really understand what it is, and they question its efficacy. But we have official third-party testing published in a scientific journal. It's got a lot of 5-star reviews from customers. And it looks really cool, and it's something you just need to buy once. Yeah, people have had really good reviews from it. It's definitely been a passion project of mine. Right now we have only four pendants, but looking forward to in the future to do all different types of jewelry: rings, earrings, bracelets, and that kind of stuff. So yeah,
very cool. Oh, we got the golden one over here.
Yeah.
Nice. I hope to have him on the show as well very soon. But yes, guys, go to aquari.store and check this out. I know about the orgone energy kind of things as well. So would you say it's similar?
Yeah, it's similar. Different names for different. Generally talking about this prima materia, this kind of Tesla called it bioluminous ether. Wilhelm Reich calls it orgone. But yeah, it's quantum energy, let's say.
There is definitely something to this in my personal experiences when it comes to, even if you don't do anything with certain minerals, they do seem to have some kind of an effect, which, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's definitely interesting. And Stelios, I would love to get a final comment from yourself as far as any advice for people in England, in the West in general? What do you think they should do? And then I would love to know what you're working on and whatever you would want to promote.
Okay, so you take me back to politics now. So I think people should become aware of what is going on. They should be more politicized and more prone to reading the news, and they should en masse reject the current paradigm, show that the usual catchphrases, the character assassination doesn't work and is meaningless, because the establishment to a very large extent is made out of basically cowards. It's the kind of people who will, if the paradigm changes, they will just say, occasionally, most of them will say, yeah, actually, we were just wrong. Apologies, we were just wrong. So keep following the news, and just understand that things are they have to take a stand for the country. Multiculturalism can't continue the way it does. A renegotiation of the relations of various communities must take place, not just in the UK, also in Europe. We can't coexist with everyone, and in many cases, you mentioned several parts. It's just knowing another culture is incredibly difficult, and something that may require a whole lifetime of trying to understand that other culture. We don't want that. We don't have any obligation to do this as Europeans. And you don't first force people to coexist and then try to see if they can coexist. That is why I think that a very strong renegotiation of the relationships between the various communities will take place, and eventually it will take place, and it must take place. And people should...
And also, I want to make sure, Orpheus, you also, I don't want to not have you also say something in the end. So after Stelios, Orpheus, and then the promotion. So, Stelios, yes.
Yeah. So, I think that people should become aware of what is going on, and stop looking away, because I'm sure that the overwhelming majority of people have encountered the problems that we're talking about, but they're looking away. It's human. In many cases, it's human. People don't always have the time to invest in political commentary that we do. But they shouldn't look away, because problems don't go away. Whether, how bad the situation is in a sense irrelevant, because even if it isn't as bad as, Orpheus may thinks, or even if it's worse, from a practical perspective, it's the same principle. People should just say, we need to improve the country and the continent. So in that respect, how bad it is secondary to what should we do about it. And, that's the most important question. And the answer is, yes, we absolutely should do something about it. The question is what? But the situation can't continue.
Absolutely. And Orpheus, anything to add to that as the final word?
No, I would just reiterate what Stelios said. It's really good. Like the ostrich head in the sand mentality it's not realistic. It's pathetic. Self-determination, like native European populations have the right to self-determination. We don't have to live in the sort of mental prison that has been created by the woke zeitgeist, and we don't have to apologize for anything, frankly. And so, terms like when people call you racist, it's a meaningless phrase, because there aren't actual racists really around. Like you'll never meet one in the street, but they'll call you racist for doing anything, any sort of like striving towards your own self-determination. So when you're dealing with the left, when you're dealing with communists, you can't apologize for anything. You can't try and give them an inch because they'll take your house. And I hope that common sense will start to prevail, because it's literally just common sense. And I think that's coming. It seems to be inevitable.
And also, when it comes to guilt, it's in many respects, absolutely, people should look back in anger. But anger isn't a good counsel. We'll have to say this as well. But absolutely, you can't have 100 communities coexisting and 99 of them are being told it's okay, look back in anger because your past historical injustices against you must be addressed. But you have the other community and say, no, don't look back in anger. No, people, absolutely, they should look back in anger when with things that merit anger. But again, anger isn't a good counsel. Now, when it comes to the question of what is to be done, I think we need another discussion here. But generally speaking, we have been forced to coexist with a number of communities, and we just don't know whether we are compatible or not. So that's a major question. You're telling me lots of things about how Muslims are supposed to think. From a genuine perspective, descriptively, I don't know to what extent that's true. I don't know. No, I don't know if anyone knows. Not even Muslims. The question is, well, right now we need to put a full stop and say that the present system that is created to demoralize the natives must be changed. A renegotiation of the rules of coexistence must take place, and then we'll see from then on. I'm sure that this is going to be the one of the major questions that online discourse is going to be focused on, and not just online discourse. Every discourse will be forced to address this question. It's just a matter of time.
Absolutely.
Now, as far as the promotion is of what I'm doing, I'm a regular host at the Lotus Eaters podcast of the Lotus Eaters. We are a good bunch here in the southwest of England. And I also have a philosophy channel. It just started. It's not about politics, completely unrelated. It's called Philosophy Across Time. It's just a little over a month old. Have 4 videos where I'm just going to be doing philosophy videos.
Everybody go and subscribe to Philosophy Across Time. Here it is. Here is the video about Prometheus. It's really good. I highly recommend you guys check that out. And also, as far as helping out BTR, be sure to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, click the bell. All of that is very important for the growth of this channel. And also Discord. I keep forgetting the Discord link. Here it is for all the people who are on Discord. You can click that. And the Patreon link I will provide as well, patreon.com/breaktherules in the chat. And tomorrow we are having another show. This is going to be a debate about the Epstein class, which is something that some people were referring to as far as Trump's administration, whether or not that is like an existential problem for the United States, or whether things are a little bit more complicated than that. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. Stelios, Disco, Orpheus, it was an immense pleasure talking to you. I hope to have more conversations like this going forward. And by the way, please don't shut off your computer after we're done, because StreamYard needs to take all of this data in. I keep forgetting to mention that sometimes, so I wanted to mention that right now. So be sure to follow these wonderful people. You're both on X. And you can follow me at LevPo on X as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lev. Nice to speak to you, Stelios.
Nice.